Welcome back, my friends, to the Nature Wanderer podcast. I'm Paul, your host, and today I want to talk a little bit about how great a week it was. The weather wasn't bad. Got outside, did a little bird banding, did some hiking. And while I was out hiking, what really excited me, it sort of excited me, I usually like hiking in the winter because in the wintertime, it's so cold that nobody is out hiking. During the summer, you get everybody out on the trails, and it's hard to get any quiet time. Even in the middle of the week, there's always somebody out there. But in the winter, if you go in the middle of the week hiking, what happens is most people are at home hibernating. They're hiding in their houses trying to stay warm. But we had out on the trails a lot of people. We kept passing a lot of people. I kind of figured the parking lot was full. It was going to be crowded out there. So part of me was a little disappointed because I like my peaceful, quiet hikes. Just being out in the woods with nature, listening to the birds, watching the animals, listening to the wind going through the trees. I mean, it's just so peaceful. No talking, no human interaction. On the other hand, it was exciting because people aren't hiding away. They're not hiding from the winter. Even when it's cold, they're getting out there and exploring nature. So that was kind of exciting for me. Exciting and disappointing at the same time. But I'd rather have people out there exploring nature. I'll find my peace and quiet in other ways. But anyhow, on to today's topic, which, by the way, is hibernation. What is hibernation? I mean, what's this thing all about? Those who don't live around the northeastern, or I'll even say the northern climates, where it stays nice and warm year-round, you are the ones who probably don't know a lot about hibernation because the animals around you don't hibernate. Or do they? Actually, they do, but it's called something else, and we'll get into that in a minute. So hibernation, the actual definition of hibernation, according to dictionary.com, is the condition or period of an animal or plant spending the winter in a dormant state. Now, just like anything in science, there's always controversy, always talk, always discussion about what is the true definition of this or that? What is the true meaning of this or that? Well, same thing happens with hibernations. There's probably a half a dozen different definitions of what hibernation truly is. But most scientists, most definitions, most people believe that hibernation is basically a condition where an animal slows down. And not just slows down as in falls asleep, takes a nap, goes to bed, but no, they actually slow their system down. Their system, their body, their movement, their energy, all of that actually slows down quite a bit. They say that the system slows to less than 5% of normal. That's just amazing. 5% of normal. So you have less than half, less than a quarter, less than 5% of your normal energy activity. And it's not just moving around, we're talking bodily functions. Yeah, your whole system slows down. Your temperature, your heart rate, your respiration, even your brain activity. Now, in a true state of hibernation, the system is slowing down to less than 5% of normal. Their body temperature, the animal's body temperature, will often be 10 to 20 degrees below what it normally is. Now, with some animals, they have done a lot of research on this hibernation thing, and they have found that some animals, there's an animal, I can't remember who it is, it's an Arctic something or other. Oh, I should know it, but this Arctic animal actually will slow its body temperature, lower its body temperature down below freezing. That's just amazing. Now, the heart rate. Okay, the heart rate keeps the blood flowing through the body. It transports oxygen. Your heart is transporting oxygen from your lungs through your blood to all the extremities in your body, all parts of your body, your brain, so that everything can function. And then it takes all the waste back, pumps it through the heart, and it goes to the body and basically excretes it out of the body. Now, all of this is happening with the heart, and that's why animals who have a high metabolism have a really high heartbeat. A heartbeat on an animal who is truly hibernating slows down quite a bit. Actually, some animals such as, the eastern chipmunk, normally a heart rate of 200 beats per minute, will slow down to about 5 beats per minute. Some animals, their heart rate will go slower than that. Some not as slow, but the heart rate does slow down. They're not moving. They don't need to pump the oxygen through the blood all around the body, so they can conserve their heartbeat. Now, another thing is breathing, respiration. When an animal is breathing, they're bringing fresh oxygen into the body and they're expelling carbon dioxide. When we're doing that, or any animal is doing that, we usually breathe quite a bit. Now, once again, this slows down with a true hibernator. Respiration will actually slow down anywhere from 50 to 100%. And you're sitting there thinking, did I hear that right? Was Paul reading his notes wrong? 100%? In other words, they stop breathing? Wouldn't they die? Well, actually, there are some animals that will stop their breathing completely. Usually, those are the reptiles and amphibians who do that. They will stop their breathing in their state of hibernation. Most other animals do have to take a breath now and then. Most of the reason for taking a breath during hibernation is to expel some of the moisture in the lungs. Otherwise, they'd get pneumonia. For instance, an animal who takes a breath once every second may change their breathing to one breath every 10 minutes. Like I said, some reptiles, some amphibians go the entire winter without breathing at all. They go into a state of dormancy with their body. No breathing, heart rate comes close to stopping, and their body temperature goes close to freezing. Now, what about brain activity? We need our brain to survive. Well, they've done studies on hibernating animals and found that, first of all, they don't dream. The brain activity doesn't need to function because they're not breathing as much. They're not beating their heart as much. What do they got to do? They're in kind of a coma state. So their brain is very little activity. Brain activity can sometimes be totally undetectable in this state of hibernation. Now, I did mention at the beginning of the show that even if you live in the South, you do have animals that go into this hibernation state, but we actually give it a different name. We call it estivation. Estivation is basically an escape from the heat. If the temperatures get too hot, an animal might not be able to function. They're using a lot of their energy, a lot of their bodily resources to keep themselves cool. And if they're doing that and also trying to breathe, trying to keep their heartbeat going, trying to do everything they need to do, and trying to cool themselves, they're using up a lot of energy. So they basically can't do anything else. So instead of doing all of this use of energy, they go into what we call estivation. Estivation is a term for an animal who hibernates, but they do it to escape the heat. Now, how do they do this? Well, some animals, I should say most of these animals who are trying to escape the heat, by going into this state of hibernation, or estivation as we call it, they will actually bury themselves in the ground. Some animals will actually climb into a shady area, so they're looking for shade, but they are going into a hibernation. This estivation, they don't want to just sit there in the shade waiting for some predator to come along and pick them off. So that's why most of them will bury themselves in the ground. Some animals, like snails, they'll actually climb up a tree. They'll climb up into this tree, find a nice place where they can blend in. They pull themselves into their shell, and then what they do is they cause mucus to be excreted around the opening of their shell, and they let it harden. So it's almost like they put themselves into a little casing. In there, they can go into this estivation state, and they can keep alive, even in these hot temperatures. Now, some animals also go into what we call a torpor state. Torpor is kind of a temporary hibernation. So these animals will slow their system down to help get through hard times, usually cold. Two of the most famous animals that go into a torpor are actually birds. The hummingbird. Now you're talking about a tiny little bird who has a very high metabolism, very fast heart rate. I mean, when they're beating their wings, the larger hummingbirds are actually beating their wings 12 beats per second. I didn't say a minute, I said second. The smaller hummingbirds are around 80 beats per second. So that's quite a lot of energy being used just to fly. The only bird that can fly backwards, the hummingbird. So when this guy's out there at nighttime, he's not flying around looking for food. He can't. He'd end up bumping into things, getting eaten by some night predator. They need a chance to sleep too, to rest. So instead of just hanging out on a branch, remember their heart is beating very quickly, their metabolism is trying to keep them warm. Instead of wasting a lot of energy, they go into this torpor at nighttime. So the hummingbird is one of the most famous ones to do this. Another bird that does it is the black-capped chickadee. The black-capped chickadee, during the winter time, on a cold evening, they slow their metabolism down, fluff their feathers up. Feathers are great insulation. So they fluff themselves up, they go into this state of torpor, and that gets them through the cold night so that they can go and live another day. Another thing that animals do in the winter, and some people mistake it for hibernation. Some scientists actually put it into the same category as hibernation, but I don't know. They're not slowing their body systems down that much, but I'll leave the definitions up to the scientists. I'm not going to go there. It's called denning. How many of you think that bears hibernate? We hear it all the time. We've seen it in the cartoons when we were kids. Bears hibernate in the winter. I've seen it so many times. I've heard it so many times. But guess what? Not totally true. Most bears will just den up. They find a place to hide away the winter, and they fall asleep. Now, they do slow their systems down a little bit. They slow their heart rate, they slow their breathing, and they lower their body temperatures. But it's not to a point where we consider it a hibernation. You go into a bear den in the middle of winter and tap them on the shoulder. I hope you have really fast feet. I know I couldn't outrun the bear. Actually, I think if I had a bear chasing me, I think I'd be scared enough I probably could outrun him. But this guy is going to wake up almost instantly, so don't try it. Whereas other hibernating animals, you wake them up in the middle of winter, it's going to take them a while to wake up. Matter of fact, you really shouldn't do that because they are conserving their energy to the point where everything has slowed down in their system. As we're talking, hibernation. If you wake them up, it's going to take a lot of energy for them to start warming their body up, to get their heart rate going faster, to get their breathing going faster, that they may not have enough stores. Even if they do go back into this hibernation state, they may not have enough energy to make it through the winter because they wasted all that extra energy trying to wake up. So never wake up a hibernating animal, or a bear in that case. But anyhow, bears, they go into what we call a deep sleep. Some bears, they'll give birth and nurse their young during the winter time while they're sleeping. Now that's the way to do motherhood. Yeah, no screaming children always nagging you for a bite. You just sleep right through the first couple of months of childhood. And then by the time they wake up, and you wake up out of your hibernation, hey, everyone is just old enough to take care of themselves other than protection and a little bit of learning. So that's the way to do it, I guess. Why do animals hibernate anyhow? I'm giving you all this information about hibernation, and you may be wondering, well, why are they doing it? I mean, it seems like a lot of work to go into this hibernation. It's just a lot of preparation. They need to get the fat built up in their bodies, that their system, even though it's slowed down, it's still using a little bit of energy. And that energy comes from their stores of fat, stores of energy they have in their body. So they need to get that fat up in the fall. That's why bears are, and other hibernating animals, not just bears, but these hibernating animals are going for the really high protein foods. So why do animals hibernate? Well, there's several reasons why an animal will hibernate. First of all, survival. That's the main reason. It's wintertime. It's cold. There's lack of food out there. And another reason is safety. Some animals figure that in the wintertime, they're too slow, too hard for them to get through the snow, so they will just find a place, den up, hibernate. They find a place to hide away, keeps them safer. But also, if you don't have a source of food in the winter, you won't survive. Now, birds can fly south for the winter. They can migrate. But most mammals cannot. It takes them a long time to travel from the northern climates down to the southern climates. So they usually stay where they are. And the ones who hibernate, they're usually the ones who have a hard time finding food. They're smaller mammals usually. They need to find a place to hide away until the food sources come back, the springtime. Lack of food, cold weather, and safety are the main reasons that an animal will hibernate. So who does hibernate? It's mostly the small mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and insects. There is one bird who does hibernate, and that's the porwell. The porwell is a really neat-looking bird. He's small. He is a little bit smaller than a robin. He's got beautiful brown markings on him. He blends in real well if he's in the leaf litter on the forest floor. But those guys actually will stick around in colder climates, and they find a nice place to hide away, and they hibernate. They actually will hibernate. It's the only bird that we know of that does this. And of course, there is a fish that hibernates. Well, besides your goldfish, who does do hibernation, the Antarctic cod is one of the only fish that will hibernate. Other fish, they're still active in the winter. They just go down below the freezing cold water on the top of the lake or the pond. They go down where the water temperature is a little bit more steady and warm. Those are the animals who hibernate. Where do they hibernate? Well, the term for a place where an animal hibernates, where they hide away for the winter, is what we call a hibernaculum. Hibernaculum is actually the Latin word for winter quarters. It's their dens. It's a place for an animal to hide away. So when I say where do they hibernate, it all depends on the animal. Some animals will find a hole in the ground and they'll hibernate in there. If you're a deep sleeper like a bear, good luck in finding a cave. I know. I was always told bears find a cave in the winter, they hide away. We have a lot of bears here in Western New York, black bears. There's very few caves big enough in Western New York to keep a bear. Where are they all going? Well, they usually find an area where there's some brush, and maybe the snow made the branches of the brush kind of bend over, and it caused it to form almost a miniature cave made out of snow. And they'll just kind of den up in that little miniature snow cave. That's where the bears are going. The smaller animals, they'll make a hole in the ground. You're going to say larger small animals like a woodchuck, groundhog, whatever you want to call him. He will dig a bigger hole down into the ground, makes himself a larger chamber down in the ground. And he goes down there in the fall. He digs a little bit more, covers up the entrance to his chamber. He doesn't want to be disturbed in the winter during his hibernation. He covers up that entrance and he goes into his hibernation there. Animals like the eastern chipmunk, they will dig a hole with several chambers. One is for storage of food, one is for a bathroom, another one may be their sleeping quarters. It all depends on the animal as to where they're hiding away. Insects behind the bark of a tree, sometimes under the ground. Reptiles and amphibians, sometimes under a pile of leaves. Sometimes they're in the lake or the river, down in the water, hibernating, down in the mud at the bottom of a pond. So it all depends on the animal as to where they are hibernating. Now, what about when to hibernate? Well, of course, it's winter unless you're estivating. Then it's sometimes in the middle of summer when it's over hot in the southern hemisphere. But in the wintertime, actual hibernation, true hibernation, these animals are triggered to go into this hibernation by the temperatures and by the day length. So as the days start to get shorter, they're knowing, hey, winter's on its way. It's going to start getting colder. I better find a nice place to den up and go into my hibernation. Another thing that triggers hibernation and these animals to know it's just about time is the food supply starts to disappear. Maybe they're a berry eater and all the berries start to die off on the bushes because the bushes are dying off. That's when these animals will be like, okay, I'm running out of food. I've already fattened up. Time to head into my hibernaculum. Time to get ready for hibernating and sleeping away the winter. So that's how they know when to hibernate. Those are their cues, the triggers, as I call them. The length of day, the temperatures getting colder, and the food supply getting more scarce. Now, as these guys are seeing the days getting shorter and the temperature is starting to drop, that's when they start preparing for the hibernation. And as I mentioned earlier, it's all about getting that extra fat on the body, the extra built up stored energy so that they can actually make it through the winter. And how do they know when to wake up, by the way? It talked about how do they know when to go to sleep, go into the hibernation. How do they know when to come out of the hibernation, or as you want to call it, wake up? They actually have an internal clock that lets them know. That internal clock in their body and their system tells them, hey, it's springtime, time to get out of the den, time to get out there and start living your life again as if nothing happened. Are there any dangers to hibernation? Well, yeah, there are. Maybe an animal wakes up too early. Their internal clock was a little bit off. Someone set the wrong alarm again. Well, they wake up a little bit early and there's no food. There's not enough warmth. So they could actually starve to death if they wake up too early. Or maybe they wake up too early or they wake up on time and all of a sudden a bad storm, the weather changes, we get some cold weather moving in. That also can cause them to starve, to not make it after a hibernation. Or maybe the bad weather goes too long and they wake up because they've used up all their stores of energy, their stores of fat. Once again, they can't go back into their hibernation. They don't have energy left. They'd starve, but there's no food out there. So all these things can make it very dangerous to hibernate. And if you pick the wrong den, the wrong place to hibernate, you got to worry about predators finding you as well. So all of these things make it dangerous to hibernate. So yes, there are dangers to hibernation. Now, I do want to mention that when we talk about hibernation, a lot of times people think, well, this animal goes to sleep, if you want to call it that, their hibernation state. They go into their hibernation state when winter starts. They sleep through the entire winter. And then in the springtime, they wake up, go about their business. And that's not totally true. Animals will wake up during their hibernation. They've actually found in studies that hedgehogs, they'll wake up anywhere between 5 and 25 days. So every 5 days or every 20 days or however long, they wake up and do what they need to do. Most animals will wake up during their hibernation just for short periods of time. They don't fully awaken. They don't go about running around trying to find food. Most of these animals are waking up, maybe gathering a little bit of food, and then they go back into their hibernation. Now, they don't have to worry about going to the bathroom because all of the stores of energy that their body's using to stay alive during hibernation, it's being used. It's not being wasted. There's no waste, so there's nothing to excrete. So these animals, they're built for doing this hibernation. Now, some animals, when they do wake up during the hibernation, in the middle of winter, maybe we had a January thaw, it got a little warmer, their system told them, okay, it's time to come out of the den, go look for some food, and then we'll go back into our hibernation. Well, if this happens, sometimes they will relocate. Maybe their den was a little bit too hot, maybe a little too cold, and they may relocate. They actually found that hedgehogs will relocate 2 to 3 times during the winter because their den is not just right. Bats do the same thing. They will relocate their dens sometimes if it's not right. So they are active during the winter, just not as much as other animals. So a hibernation is not, hey, you go to sleep and you don't wake up. No, they are active once in a while. They're going into this hibernation state for, it depends on the animal, sometimes 5 days, and they'll wake up and then they go back into their hibernation. Now, when they're waking up, it's only for a matter of a couple hours maybe, and then they're back into the hibernation. Can humans hibernate? Boy, I hear it all the time. I wish we could hibernate in the winter. You're better off just heading south if you don't like the winter. Find the warmer weather. There are studies, though, by NASA, the European Space Agency, on hibernation. See if they can get people to hibernate somehow. The reason they want to do this is so that they can go on longer space trips. Save the energy, save the supplies they need so that they can go deeper into space with the astronauts. So all these science fiction movies you see, they're studying it so that they can try to do it. Get people into a state of hibernation, send them further into space, and then wake them up out of this hibernation. Now, some hospitals, some scientists are also studying this because it will help with trauma cases especially. If a person comes in with trauma, they have maybe minutes to save that person, especially if they're bleeding out. They found that if they put cold blankets, put them in cold temperatures, it slows their system down enough, almost like hibernation, slows their system down enough that they have more time. So they buy themselves more time to help that person. So there are studies going on about trying to make people hibernate. Now, many scientists say it cannot happen because our systems are not designed for it. Our digestive system, for instance. We would actually have to have tubes going into us if we did hibernate because we are not built to live off of our fat stores. Our systems are just not built for that. So if you are thinking about just sleeping away the winter, my advice is no. It just is not possible. Maybe in the future they'll come up with enough research and figure it out, but still you're missing out on so much in the wintertime. It looks like we've come to the end of the episode for today. If you enjoyed wandering through nature with me, please help me out by subscribing to the podcast, write a review, download the episodes. Also, be sure to let all your friends know about the podcast so that they can join us as we wander through nature. The more the merrier. If you have any nature questions or ideas for future episodes, please feel free to drop me a message on my Instagram page at The Nature Wanderer. There's an underscore between each word, or my website at naturewanderer.org. You can also support the podcast by joining my Patreon, which will also give you extras, including videos, bonus podcast in the future, and pictures, plus much more. We also have an online store now. The online store, show your support of the Nature Wanderer podcast and show your support of nature. Have a great week and keep exploring the nature around you.